The interview suit hung stiff and unfamiliar on the back seat, like a promise already starting to fade when the single dad noticed the blue car stranded on the side of the empty highway. The hood was up, the morning sun glaring off twisted metal, and beside it stood a woman whose posture carried both pride and quiet panic. He glanced at the time on the dashboard, felt his chest tighten, and in that single breath-long moment, his entire future seemed to balance between what he needed and what someone else needed more. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a second to pause right here. If you believe kindness still matters in a world that feels rushed and cold, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. These stories live because of people who believe in second chances. He was not supposed to stop. Everything in his life said he could not afford to. The job interview downtown was the first real opportunity since his wife's death 2 years earlier, the first chance to step out of night shifts, borrowed money, and the constant fear of not being enough for his little boy. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he drove past the broken car, his mind already rehearsing answers, imagining a stable paycheck, a future where he could finally breathe. But in the rearview mirror, he saw her again, standing alone in the wide-open field, phone pressed to her ear, shoulders tense. Something old and stubborn in him refused to let go of that image. He pulled over a few hundred feet ahead, sat in silence, then shut off the engine. The moment he stepped out of the car, he already knew he would be late. He already knew this decision might cost him everything he had been working toward. Still, he walked back. The woman looked up with surprise, etched across her face relief and embarrassment colliding in her eyes. She tried to look composed, but the situation had clearly shaken her. The car had overheated, she explained in rushed fragments, no signal, an urgent meeting she could not miss, and no one stopping on that empty stretch of road. He listened without interrupting. The way he had learned to listen after life taught him how fragile people could be. He rolled up his sleeves, popped the hood wider, and assessed the damage with hands that had fixed more than engines over the years. He was not a mechanic by trade, just a man who had learned to make things work because no one else would do it for him. Sweat gathered at his temples as minutes ticked by, each one another nail in the coffin of his interview. He thought about his son eating cereal alone at the kitchen table, about the overdue bills folded neatly in a drawer, about how close he was to finally changing their story. The car took longer than expected, a cracked hose, no spare in sight. He improvised, patched what he could, flagged down a truck passing by to borrow coolant, and worked with the quiet urgency of someone who knew the cost of delay. The woman offered money at one point, pressing bills toward him, but he shook his head without even looking at them. This was not about money. It never was. By the time the engine finally turned over smoothly, the sun had climbed higher and his phone buzzed with a reminder he no longer needed. The interview was already starting without him. The realization landed heavy in his chest, not dramatic, just deeply, painfully real. He closed the hood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and felt something break and settle inside him at the same time. She thanked him with words that felt too small for the situation, her voice thick with emotion she tried to hide. She offered again to make it right somehow, to help him get where he needed to go. But he simply smiled in that tired way single parents learn. He told her it was okay, that sometimes helping someone else was the point, even when it hurt. He watched her drive away, the blue car shrinking into the distance, taking with it the last thread of the morning he had planned. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Traffic crawled, his mind replaying what-ifs he tried not to indulge. He imagined the hiring manager glancing at an empty chair, making assumptions, crossing his name off a list. He imagined explaining to his son why nothing had changed yet again. When he finally parked outside their small apartment, the weight of disappointment settled fully on his shoulders. Life did not pause for his sacrifice. The days that followed were quiet and heavy. He returned to his old routines, early mornings, late nights, stretching groceries, smiling for his son, even when exhaustion pressed behind his eyes. He told himself that he would do the same thing again if given the choice. That kindness was not meant to be transactional. Still, some nights when the apartment was silent, He allowed himself to grieve the future he had almost touched. A week later, an unfamiliar number appeared on his phone while he was packing his son's lunch. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another rejection or spam. When he answered, the voice on the other end was calm, professional, and strangely warm. The caller asked if he was the man who had helped a stranded driver on the highway the previous Monday. His heart skipped, confusion and caution rising together. When he confirmed, there was a brief pause, then words that made him sit down hard on the kitchen chair. Why, the woman with the broken car was not just anyone. She was the CEO of a regional company, the same company he had been supposed to interview with that morning. She had recognized his name later that day when reviewing candidate files, recognized the quiet integrity behind it. She explained that she had never forgotten his face, the way he had chosen her safety over his own opportunity without knowing who she was or what she could offer him in return. She told him that resumes and rehearsed answers mattered, but character mattered more. That day on the roadside had shown her more about him than any interview ever could. She invited him to come in not for an interview, but for a conversation. Wow. The building downtown felt different when he walked into it days later, not as a desperate applicant, but as someone whose story had already spoken for him. He wore the same suit, still a little stiff, but his posture was steadier. He talked about his life honestly, about loss, responsibility, resilience, and the quiet strength it took to keep choosing kindness when the world did not reward it immediately. He walked out with more than a job offer. He walked out with dignity restored, with a future unfolding in ways he had not dared to imagine. The position came with flexible hours, benefits, and a salary that made his hands shake when he saw the number. But what stayed with him most was the look of respect in her eyes, the unspoken understanding that some choices echo further than we ever know. Months passed and life slowly transformed. Mornings became less rushed. Evenings were filled with homework at the table instead of worry. His son laughed more, slept better, and started talking about big dreams with the fearless confidence of a child who finally felt safe. The small apartment gave way to a modest house with a yard, and on quiet weekends, the single dad would sometimes find himself thinking back to that empty highway, to the moment everything changed because he chose to stop. Kindness had not erased his struggles overnight. It had not made life easy. But it had opened a door that would never have existed otherwise. It had reminded him and everyone who later heard his story that doing the right thing is never wasted, even when it feels invisible in the moment. As this story nears its end, take a second to check in with your heart. If this journey moved you, if it reminded you of the power of simple human decency, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive. And before we close, here's a special request. Please comment below and tell us one moment in your life when kindness changed everything, whether you were the giver or the receiver. The single dad never became famous, and the woman never sought praise. Their lives simply crossed for a brief, ordinary moment that turned out to be anything but. Somewhere out there on a quiet road, another choice like that is waiting to be made, and maybe, just maybe, this story will inspire someone to stop. The story didn't end with the job offer. In many ways, that was only where the real transformation began. The first weeks at the new job felt unreal to the single dad, like walking through a life that belonged to someone else. He woke up every morning before his alarm, not from anxiety this time, but from disbelief. He would stand in the doorway of his son's room for a moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of the boy's chest, reminding himself why he had said yes to every hard day before this one. The routine slowly shifted. Breakfast became calmer. There was time to talk, to laugh, to listen to small stories about school that once got lost in the rush. At work, he didn't try to impress anyone. He showed up the same way he had on that roadside, steady, observant, willing to help without asking what was in it for him. People noticed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet ways that mattered. When projects stalled, he stayed late. When coworkers struggled, he stepped in. He never mentioned the highway, never spoke of sacrifice. To him, it was simply how you moved through the world when you knew what it felt like to fall. The CEO watched from a distance. She saw the way teams trusted him, the way his presence lowered tension in rooms full of pressure. She had built her career on sharp decisions and faster instincts, but this reminded her of something she had almost forgotten. That leadership wasn't always about force or brilliance, but about grounding others when things felt unstable. The broken car had not just stalled her engine that day. It had stalled her pace long enough to remember why she started. One afternoon, months later, she asked him to walk with her during a site visit. The conversation drifted from work to life, to parenting, to loss. He didn't overshare, but he didn't hide either. He spoke of grief as something that never truly leaves, only changes shape. He spoke of love as something that teaches you how to be braver than you think. She listened, not as a boss, but as a human being, reminded that strength often comes wrapped in ordinary clothes. At home, the changes continued to ripple outward. Bills no longer arrived like threats. The refrigerator stayed full. The single dad bought his son a small bicycle one weekend, watching him wobble down the sidewalk, laughter echoing through the neighborhood. In that moment, he felt something close to peace, a feeling he once believed belonged only to the past. But life, as always, tested him again. One evening, he received a call from the daycare. His son had fallen ill, nothing serious, but enough to need care. Without hesitation, he shut down his computer and left the office. Old fear flickered in his chest, the reflex to apologize for being a burden, for choosing family. Instead, the CEO simply nodded and told him to go. No questions, no consequences. That was when he understood that the kindness he'd shown on the highway had not just returned to him, it had multiplied. Months turned into a year. His role expanded. Responsibilities grew, and with them, his confidence. He began mentoring younger employees, people who reminded him of who he had once been, tired, overlooked, trying to prove their worth in a world that rarely paused long enough to see it. He told them gently that character was not a weakness. That integrity had a way of traveling further than ambition alone. One rainy afternoon, he drove that same stretch of highway again, purely by chance. The memory hit him harder than he expected. He pulled over, stepped out of the car, and stood there for a moment, rain soaking into his jacket. The road looked smaller now, less dramatic, but the weight of that choice still hummed beneath the surface. He smiled softly, not with pride, but with gratitude, for the man he had been when no one was watching. That night, he tucked his son into bed, listening as the boy talked about wanting to help people when he grew up. The single dad felt his throat tighten. Legacy, he realized, wasn't about wealth or titles. It was about the quiet lessons children absorb from watching how you treat strangers, how you respond when it costs you something. The CEO eventually shared the story during a company retreat, not naming him at first, framing it as a reminder of the culture she wanted to protect. When she finally revealed it was one of their own, the room fell silent, not in shock, but in respect. Applause followed, long and sincere. The single dad stood there uncomfortable but deeply moved, understanding that his small choice had become a compass for others. As the years went on, life remained imperfect. There were hard days, moments of doubt, echoes of grief that resurfaced unexpectedly. But there was also stability, purpose, and a quiet joy rooted in knowing he had stayed true to himself when it mattered most. If this continuation of the story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that goodness often works slowly but deeply, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and stay subscribed to the channel. And before we close, leave a comment telling us this. Would you have stopped that day? Because somewhere, right now, another road is waiting, another choice balancing between urgency and compassion. And stories like this exist to remind us that choosing kindness can change far more than we ever imagine.